Chapter 131, Completion of the Door of Space. Yong-ho slowly opened his eyes. Just as he woke up from a pleasant deep sleep, he regained consciousness naturally and calmly. First, it was cold. He felt someone's familiar softness all over his body. Scathach. Specifically, it was the blue liquid that Scathach used to handle. As if he was asleep for quite a while. His eyes hurt, but he couldn't properly move his arms and legs. After struggling in the blue liquid, he gave up and looked straight ahead. Somebody's pleasant smile welcomed him. "Let me wipe it." Scathach, sitting on the ice throne, moved her fingers lightly. Then some of the blue liquid came up like tentacles and wiped his face. Her service didn't end there. One of the blue liquid tentacles stopped near his mouth and spewed clear, cold water. He didn't feel like drinking it, but it tasted slightly sweet and fresh. Resting his chin on her hand, she said, "Don't worry, because this is a clear water I've drawn nearby. It wasn't the blue liquid or your purified urine." Really?" Scathach giggled at his question. He felt nervous because he couldn't understand why he shook off useless thoughts and looked around. He saw dungeon spirits sitting at regular intervals around Scathach's throne. Her whole body except her head was covered in blue liquid. Everyone is recovering, except that cheerful skeleton. He got confused again at her statement. She gently moved her hand and turned the blue liquid containing him halfway around. At the entrance to her small palace was Skull, lying naked with his armor removed. I tried to adjust his posture several times. Maybe he feels the most comfortable in that posture, namely rolling on the floor. She was correct, he asked her. "Can't you recover, Skull? Are his injuries too severe?" "No, his injury itself is not very severe, but he needs a different type of treatment. I treat people here by sharing my vitality. But because Skull is an undead, his body will be broken and destroyed if I share my vitality with him." Yong-ho could understand it. Just like in games, casting heal magic to an undead damages their physical health rather than healing it. He looked at Skull with a bit of anxiety. He didn't think of any other way to heal Skull than evolving or advancing him. Scathach said again, "Don't worry too much. I think a special skeleton like Skull can recover naturally. With sufficient mana, he will stand up quickly. Actually, he has recovered quite a bit." What? Then, did Skull have something like a natural recovery function? He had never heard about it. Scathach tilted her head and asked, You didn't know? Is this the first time Skull has ever been injured?" "No, he was injured before." "Did Skull get this new ability when he had a consolidation, evolution, or advancement?" Skull was now out of the lineage of the general undead monsters. Maybe he got it while he became a magic knight. Since becoming a knight, he was not injured so much. If that was the case, it was reasonable to think that Yong-ho didn't know his natural recovery function, but why? Yong-ho felt somewhat strange about Skull. Skull was the type that rolled on the floor as usual, but he felt different about it this time. To be precise, there was something different about Skull before and after fighting Baphomet Skull. When Yong-ho called, Skull replied back immediately, "Skull, Skull." But he still didn't stand up. Scathach added, "Well, it's very hard for Skull to stand up now. All the joints of his body were broken. His upper body was restored yesterday. If his recovery goes well, he can stand up tomorrow." She was optimistic, but Yong-ho couldn't be relieved to hear that. The fact that Skull's upper body had recovered yesterday meant that Yong-ho himself was unconscious for at least a day. "How many days have passed since I got here?" 3 days, about 62 hours, exactly." "Really, 3 days since you fought Baphomet? You were shocked mentally rather than being damaged physically. Besides, you used up all your energies, more than you could. Because of that, I am completely exhausted, as you see." Smiling warmly, she let her shoulders droop. Come to think of it, she looked more pale than usual. The reason she didn't get up from the throne was probably because she was weak. Yong-ho instinctively realized it. Scathach's vitality, which offset Baphomet's death, was not just power stored in her godly energy. Actually, she drew it from herself, just as Yong-ho took his dungeon spirit's power through Brigada. He also understood how he could defeat Baphomet, and why Scathach and Gusion asked him to challenge Baphomet. Apart from Yong-ho's suffering, Baphomet's body was clearly weakened. So much so that it was incomparable to the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon, such as Gusion and Scathach. Nevertheless, Baphomet was strong. Its power of death was overwhelming. Yong-ho could defeat it, because he could offset Baphomet's death with her vitality. Otherwise, even if Yong-ho himself managed to overcome its death with the power of greed, he would have been defeated in the end. Is it true that I can use godly energy to draw out the power of the 12 spirits that recognize me? That's why it's called godly energy. However, you can't do it freely, like drawing out the power of your own dungeon spirits, because they haven't fully recognized you. In order to derive their power, you need the corresponding power. I don't know what method you used, but in this fight you made it, and you stole my power. Because of that you won. But I was exhausted. It seemed that she referred to the manner of greed that Yong-ho amplified by the outburst of his anguish. Yong-ho asked again, then what is Baphomet's power? Same thing, Baphomet can use its power, but not completely. Just like you used my power, it needed to pay the price. You defeated him, but you are not yet capable enough to control Baphomet's death. After stopping there, she took a big breath. She looked at Yong-ho quietly, with his chin resting on her hand, and continued again softly. You don't have to be too impatient. Someday, you will get the power of everybody, I can guarantee it for you. Strangely enough, Yong-ho felt relieved to hear what she said. He leaned against the blue liquid. After relaxing anew, he looked back at his own spirits, especially Catalina. He felt reassured. Scathach laughed at that. Oh my god, your affection for her is obvious now. Yong-ho decided to become impudent at that moment. He calmly turned his gaze to her and said, I heard from Armin that the 3rd floor belongs to Elune Wright. And given her personality, she is probably fully ready for any attack. In a sense, you might find her tougher than Baphomet. So, I recommend that you challenge the 3rd floor after getting stronger. Suddenly, she closed her eyes tightly, then snapped her fingers lightly. Then the blue liquid surrounding him was sucked back to the floor. Like before, the magical power arising from her dressed him back. I'm done healing you, little master. Your spirits need to recover for another half a day, so go up first. I think Lucia has lots of things to report to you. It had been as many as 3 days since he got here. So, he was curious about what was going on the ground. Thank you, Scathach. You're my little sister. You can always rely on me. With a smile, she waved her hands, and Yong-ho responded quickly, then hurried out of her place. At that moment, he immediately heard Lucia's voice, as if she had been waiting for him. Master, Butler June and Tigrius, head of the House of Randald, have something to report to you. Jun, the only female dungeon spirit among goblin rangers, had been on the job training as a butler apprentice under Eligos for a while. Since Eligos was absent for the past few days, she probably took over his job. Salami, who was rolling around at the entrance to the Garden of Life, recognized Yong-ho and quickly approached. He quickly climbed on Salami's back and heard Lucius' report. Jun's report is about the current status of the dungeon spirits, the number of gold mines, the tax collected from the Free City for this month, and the control of the dungeon of the House of Abigail. Briefing him quickly, she showed him light sentences and a few numbers. It was a much more simplified report than usual. Yong-ho understood why Lucia was in a hurry, so he gave it a quick look and asked for the next report. This is a report from Demon King Tigrius under your command. Terminus, the fight between the Western Owners Alliance and Embryo is over. Embryo has won. Embryo seems to be realigning troops. Tigrius got this intelligence 12 hours ago. After all, Yong-ho was sliding into the inevitable fight. Chapter 132, Completion of the Door of Space. 2. Moreover, he could not take Lucius' report as real-time. Perhaps the fight itself already ended at least 12 hours earlier by now. Probably the fighting was over 2 or 3 days ago. What would be Embryo's next move? Who destroyed the Western Owners Alliance? Would he advance into the southern region directly, or take a brief break? Your subordinate, Demon King Tigrius, has requested materials for fortifying the House of Randald. Since he is in a very urgent situation, you might want to help him out as soon as possible. Salami, who noticed that something serious was going on, quickly moved. After arriving at the central hall of the Garden of Life immediately, he climbed the stairs leading to the ground. Lucia, how far is the House of Randald from the place of the final battle between the Western Owners Alliance and Embryo? Because they fought deep in the west, it would take at least 5 days based on their average marching speed. If so, If so, young Ho could feel relaxed even if Embryo already started his forces. And there was little possibility that Embryo started his forces right after defeating the Western Owners Alliance. As expected, Tigrius was a very careful guy. Lucia showed Young Ho not only the news about Embryo's victory, but also the paragraphs from the report that Tigrius filed separately. It was about the progress in their fight, the size of the troops mobilized by both sides, and the movement of Embryo's forces located elsewhere. Embryo could not immediately move his forces. He needed to realign after the battle. He had to have them take a rest, even for a day. If that was the case, Young Ho had some time to prepare for his advance. Even if Embryo decided to advance to the southern region as quickly as possible, it would take at least 3 days for them to reach Young Ho's place. Salami ran down the hallway of the House of Mammon. The dungeon spirits, who welcomed back Young Ho after a few days, showed their respect to him, but he could not afford to return their greetings. Kicking the door of the Demon King, Young Ho ordered, "Tell Bergrim to prepare the weapon for Skull. Tell Tigrius that I will supply him with the necessary materials. Tell Oros to have his men stand by, so they can move any time Ophelia and her forces will understand what I mean." "Are you going to head straight to the House of Randolt after stopping by the dungeon market?" Young Ho got off Salamis' back. When Uriah, who was cleaning the Demon King's room with Baduk, nodded to say hello, he raised his hand lightly and sat down on the throne. "No, I'm going to leave after 1 or 2 days break." Since he had several days of preparing for Embryo's attack, Young Ho had to make the most of this period. Although Lucia didn't know what Young Ho was thinking, she didn't ask anymore. "Okay, I will convey your message to Bergrim, Tigrius, and Oros." Tust, Lucia's sincere voice was fading from his ears. After taking a breath, he closed his eyes. Then he accessed the virtual space of the dungeon market. The virtual space of the dungeon market was a huge network created by magic. The head of each house could enjoy virtual services by accessing the network through clients provided by the dungeon merchant. Young Ho slowly opened his eyes. Since everything that he saw, heard, and touched in a virtual space was transmitted directly through consciousness, not through his 5 senses, it was not necessary to have a human body, but all the heads of houses, including Young Ho, possessed the same physical body in the virtual space as they did in the real world. The virtual space was kind of a device to not only protect self-consciousness within a huge mass of mental magic called a virtual space, but it also reduced the sense of incongruity that one felt instinctively. Young Ho was now familiar with it, for he accessed it so many times. However, he felt a sense of incongruity instead of feeling familiar this time. When he opened his eyes, it was not a white space that filled my vision. There was light through the darkness. The piles of light connected in a series of dots, like an archipelago located in the Great Sea, had different shapes. Funny enough, the current situation itself was quite familiar to him, for it was similar to the scene he saw when he peeked through the memories of Kaiwan, Mammon, and Skathak through Mana. But why did he suddenly see these things? Did something happen while he was accessing the virtual space? Was that the reason why he regenerated the memory from Mammon embedded in himself, or the mana of the 12 spirits? Young Ho stepped forward. Then, one of the piles of lights came to his nose. He heard no sound. He focused on those who stood among the lights. Gusyon was bleeding. He cried out, sitting on the floor, with his body covered with scars. Skathach was breathing life into him. Young Ho couldn't grasp the situation. He didn't have any clue, just like Skathach's memory that he saw in the Garden of Life. Only Gusyon and Skathach were in the dark. Skathach was also crying. Young Ho was really shocked to see her crying with a messy face like a child, because she always smiled cheerfully. Young Ho gulped before he knew it. He realized that Gusyan's tearful gaze was directed at a certain place. Young Ho moved on then. Gusyan and Skathach faded from him. A new pile of light came to him. It was Citri. She wasn't as calm and elegant as she had been. She cried sadly. She, who squatted on the floor, was holding a loon covered with blood. Young Ho could not comprehend the scene. He couldn't even tell whose memory it was. Now Alun opened her lips with an effort. Citri bowed hastily, and Alun slowly moved her lips. Young Ho didn't know what Alun was talking about since her voice was hardly audible, but Young Ho instinctively felt that it was Alun's. Last Citri nodded several times. Elune smiled gently at her. She tried to touch Citrus' cheeks with her bloody hands, but couldn't. Her arms soon drooped again and stopped moving. It was a deep silence. Citri touched Elune's cheeks with her trembling hands. She hugged Elune's body that started to get cold and kissed her forehead several times. Her tears didn't stop. Weeping silently, Citri held Elune's head in her arms, then looked into the sky. She was looking at something in the air. Young Ho stepped forward again. Instead of the red sky of the demon world, he encountered a new pile of light this time. The moment he saw the back of someone he knew, he lost memory. Darkness swallowed everything up. "It's all my fault," Young Ho heard a voice. The moment a ray of light drove away the pitch-black darkness, it turned into pure white, as if to turn a page of a book. The virtual space of the dungeon market returned to its original place. Young Ho turned around. Citri was blankly standing in the direction where the voice came from. Young Ho saw her sad eyes. Recalling her a moment ago, Young Ho felt like tears were about to flow down her cheeks at any moment. But Citri didn't cry. She even erased her grim smile and laughed cheerfully. She pointed to Young Ho's left arm with her eyes. "I see. You started to create godly energy. I wish I had anticipated it. But it's faster than I expected. It's really my fault." A white chair rose behind Young Ho and Citri's backs. Citri asked him to take a seat. "As you can guess, what you saw a moment ago is my memory. The mana of the 12 spirits embedded in your lovely magic field, and that person. Whether the mana of the King of Greed came by coincidence or necessity, it stimulated the storehouse of memories I made. I wonder if I have to call it a kind of harmonized phenomenon." Young Ho opened his lips, but he couldn't say anything. He had lots of things to ask, such as what the memories he had seen were, why Elune died in Citrus' arms, and what happened the day Mammon died. But Young Ho stopped himself from asking. Properly speaking, he couldn't, because the moment he made eye contact with Citri, he realized that she would not answer all his questions. Chapter 133, Completion of the Door of Space 3. Citri lifted her hands lightly with her palms up. "This is my private space. You would not have seen all those things in my memory in a normal virtual space. Otherwise, I would have prepared something in advance. That's my fault, though. You haven't done anything wrong. I don't have any intention to get upset because you peeked into my memory." When she finished speaking, she let her shoulders droop. She said a little jokingly, "Well, I can't deny any more that I'm also an exclusive dealer for the House of Mammon." She stuck out her tongue at the end of her words, tilting her head. Normally, he could hardly see her acting charmingly like that. Citri was beautiful. Her acting charmingly for the first time fascinated him. However, he couldn't erase her weeping face from his mind. He seemed to discern her feelings hidden in her charming behavior. "Well, shall we get back to our business?" Citri approached him with a chair. The distance between them was wide enough to have a small table between them. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. After forcibly emptying his mind, he faced Citri again. "I would like to buy something." Then he quickly moved his fingers. Then, a document composed of letters of light was created before her eyes. It was about the last installment of materials needed to fortify the house of Randalt. Citri nodded. Then she moved her fingers and presented a bill for the materials to Young Ho. It almost matched the cost Tigrius specified in the report. They stroked the deal by signing in the air. Since he already spent all of the remaining budget for the fortification, he could not purchase anything else unless Oros arranged the financial support from the House of Abigail. It was time to leave. But Young Ho could not stand up because Citri, who already got close enough to touch his knees, quietly grabbed Young Ho's hand. "You are very urgent, dear client." Young Ho did not hide. It wasn't because he peeked into her memory that he couldn't focus on her surprisingly soft touch. Embryo defeated the Western Owners Alliance. Most probably, they will be marching to the south. Embryo's forces were different from previous enemies. He could not be compared with not only Foras and Jungshiros, but also Agarez and Tigrius. Citri looked into Young Ho's eyes and tilted her head. So Young Ho was embarrassed. Citri grabbed his hand a little harder. She asked, facing close to him, "What are you afraid of?" It was Young Ho who boldly challenged Baphomet, one of Mammon's 12 spirits. Then, could Young Ho unusually be scared of Embryo just because he was a powerful demon king who occupied both the north and west? The reason that Young Ho felt more nervous now was not because he was afraid of Embryo. Even when he had to face Foras as the head of the House of Mammon with no resources, he could not think of the option to run away. What Yong-ho felt nervous about was the difference between his fight against the Floor Masters in the arena, as well as 12 spirits, and his upcoming fight against Embryo. He had also fought the powerful Agares, what made him feel uneasy. Citri discovered that Yong-ho himself didn't know exactly why he was uneasy. That was why she let go of his hand and caressed the back of his hand gently. Well, it's me who wants to be comforted now. Still, since you are my deal client, let me tell you something. Looking straight into his eyes, Citri withdrew her hand and asked, "My dear customer, what does the House of Mammon mean to you?" Obviously, she was not asking him about the long history or tradition of the House of Mammon. She didn't mean that he should take pride in being the descendant of that great king of greed. What did the House of Mammon mean to Yong-ho? He blinked. In no time, he gave a hollow smile, for he understood why he was more scared about fighting Embryo than Baphomet. The House of Mammon was not a place that he was taken to forcibly. It was a precious house. It was a place that he lived with not only Catalina and Eligos, but many dungeon spirits. But Embryo was different from Baphomet or the Floor Masters. He could destroy not only himself, but also all of the Mammon House. It's okay, since the King of Greed has been greedy for ages. It's natural that you want to take them all, because Mammon himself was also a very greedy person. Citri laughed brightly, just like she did to Alun. He kissed Yong-ho's forehead. "Let me stop here. I look forward to seeing you again next time." She stepped back. As soon as she moved her hand playfully, pure white swept over his mind. Yong-ho opened his eyes. The Demon King's room was quiet since Uriah and Baduk left after cleaning the room. He took a big breath. He moved his fingers and opened the reports Lucia submitted into the air again. He read them all, but paid attention to one paragraph. He saw it, but he deliberately put it off. The door of space was completed at a time when his fight with Embryo was around the corner. Yong-ho smiled. He reached out and removed the report. It wasn't because he didn't want to go back to his home country. He wanted to see his father and his friends. He wanted to eat chicken or coke, but not now. He already decided on something when he resumed the construction of the door of the space. Back then, he vowed that he would go back to his home country only after defending the House of Mammon, his house, by defeating Embryo Lucia. "Yes, master. Tell Skathak to speed up healing my dungeon spirits. There is something I have to finish today." He made up his mind. So, instead of stopping and turning around, he just had to go straight ahead. He stood up from the throne. Then he headed to Bergram's workroom to pick up the weapons to give to Skull in person. Gusion was different from him in Citri's memory. Encountering Yong-ho, Gusion burst into a hearty laughter. Skathak was right. "It's really my first time seeing a head of a house like my little master. I've defended the arena for over 1,000 years. But this is my first time in my whole life." The former heads of the House of Mammon sitting in the stand were also confused. Kaiwan, standing next to Gusion, did not hide her embarrassment. She laughed awkwardly, as if he was dumbfounded, and asked, Yong-ho, pointing with her chin, "Are you really okay?" "Well, no problem." Replying immediately, he did not look back. Behind his back were not only Catalina, but also the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon, standing. Nobody among the previous heads of the House of Mammon who had visited the arena brought all of them there with him. Why? There were several reasons. For example, it was dangerous for anybody who was not the house head to challenge in the arena. Or it was because those dungeon spirits who inherited the legacy of the House of Mammon might become stronger than its head. Or it was because the house head didn't want to share the opportunity called the arena with them, even if they were dungeon spirits. Or it was because the house head was afraid of an increase in those who knew the secret. There was only one thing that really bothered Yong-ho. It was none other than the danger of the arena. But if he could share the power with them through Brigada, or if the dungeon spirits could refrain themselves from challenging the floors under the command of Yong-ho, he could reduce the danger of the arena drastically. When you go out to the arena, it's only after all of you get advancement. Yong-ho wasn't going to be content with just keeping it. He was determined to have Embryo dare not to covet the House of Mammon, let alone the north and the east. Now the fight against Embryo was just around the corner. Yong-ho didn't have enough time. But Yong-ho and his subordinate spirits were determined to stop and defeat Embryo's forces. Each of the dungeon spirits moved forward and embarked on the challenge one by one. Chapter 14 Sword of the House of Mammon. It had already been a few months since Embryo, the demon king of wolves, mobilized his forces in the north. Embryo fought constantly throughout that period. As a result, he unified the northern region and destroyed the western region. The outcomes of the wars were different. Although they were invaded by Embryo's forces, the results were different in each region. Most of the dungeons in the north survived. Not all the heads of houses there were annihilated. Many of them survived by going under his command. On the other hand, the western region was thoroughly destroyed. To put more pressure on the Western Owners Alliance, Embryo destroyed the heart of the dungeons that he already attacked. The destruction of the dungeon meant the collapse of their livelihood. Moreover, Embryo erased not only the dungeons but also the estates of the heads of houses from the map. Only ruins remained in the western region. Most of the heads of houses there were killed. Residents there who lost their houses had no choice but to become refugees or bandits to survive. Embryo accepted most of those refugees to use them as human shields in the next war. On the day the Western Owners Alliance collapsed, the last dungeon in the west, the House of Burn, fell. After greedily swallowing the heart of the dungeon, Embryo mobilized his forces into the only city left in the western region. The battle, which left total ruins behind, had a bad effect on Embryo's forces as well. Their fatigue was different from it when they unified the northern part. But Embryo didn't want to pause in the attack. Although he occupied the western region right after destroying the northern area, he became impatient and greedy. The situation drove him into a corner. The turbulence that Embryo himself created by starting the war was no longer playing its role. The eastern and southern regions were virtually unified under different flags. Instead of fighting each other like those in the northern region, the heads of houses united as one like the Western Owners Alliance to block Embryo himself. Of course, Embryo could stop advancing anymore and go back. If he led his troops back to the north, those in the east and the south would not dare to make the mistake of raising up an army to challenge him first. However, Embryo could not take over the southern area if he gave up now. It was also against his own ambition, and the King of Gluttony would not allow it. The timing could not be better if he decided to attack the southern area. The confrontation between the King of Pride and the King of Envy, which was intensifying in the northern part of the demon world, diverted the king's attention from the south to the north. Even the King of Gluttony, who was the strongest supporter and enemy of Embryo, was no exception. So, now was the golden opportunity for Embryo to attack the southern region. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance for Embryo to unify the southern region for the first time since the great King of Greed, Mammon. The problem is the eastern part. It was the eastern part, where there were the most heads of houses, but only 2 of them shared the power of all others there, and Embryo could not ignore their power. Embryo wondered why they didn't attack the northern region while he was fighting the Western Owners Alliance. The reply to his question was simple. They were waiting for the Western Owners Alliance to fall into Embryo's hands. Then what would they do next? If I attack the southern region, they will immediately advance to the north, Embryo thought. Obviously, they read each other's intentions too well. It was highly likely that the heads of houses in the eastern part struck a deal with those in the southern region. In other words, those in the south would be an anvil for their counterparts in the east, while those in the east would be a hammer for their counterparts in the south. Embryo smiled lightly. If that was the case, he would carry out what they wanted. Let me attack the southern region. He was going to attack it as fast and as strong as possible. While the forces he left in the north were blocking their counterparts in the east, he would lead his army to destroy the southern area. After occupying the south, he would advance straight into the east to smash them. It would have been difficult for him to make the same decision as this if he had to wage a war in the human world, not the demon world. Why? It was because of the problem of military supplies. The western area, which had been thoroughly destroyed, could not serve as a supply base properly. If Embryo penetrated into the southern area to attack the eastern part, it was evident that the supplies route would be unusually long. It was too unstable to make up for the supplies by plundering in the enemy's area. No matter how well the soldiers fought, they couldn't fight without eating. However, they could solve this problem in the demon world. The solution was to keep the dungeons in the south instead of destroying them as they did in the western region. This didn't mean that they would solve the problem of supplies by consuming the food in the dungeons under their control. They were going to use the dungeon market. By using the newly acquired dungeon market as a transport destination, they were going to purchase grains from the dungeon market. In addition to grains, they could supply not only military equipment, but also dungeon spirits as much as they wanted, if they had the funds. As everyone in the demon world admitted, the dungeon market's delivery was fast and accurate. Moreover, even 6 kings could do nothing about the dungeon market. The heads of houses in the southern or eastern area could not obstruct Embryon's deal with the dungeon market. Embryo had enough money. The number of goods he collected in the process of destroying the dungeons and cities in the west was truly enormous. He realigned his focus in the last city of the western region. Then he ordered Bizarro to move his troops to the south as the advance party, who a former househead was now serving as his trusted general. Embryo's forces began to move. Finally, his army launched an attack on the south. As expected, Bizarro's advance party used the crossroads where the House of Randalt was located as the attack route. Since Embryo planned to take the dungeons in the southern region under his command, Bizarro's decision was a natural choice. Bizarro, the demon king of rain, was a practical man. He knew how to use those refugees from the western region as human shields in the war. There was no plausible declaration of war or a magnificent speech to raise the morale of his forces. Bizarro advanced his troops into the dungeon of the House of Randalt. A cruel battle began. Screams and howls filled the dungeon. Since dozens, rather hundreds of lighting fixtures cleared the darkness in the dungeon, the unfolding scene was harrowing all the more. Nothing could hide the tragic casualties everywhere. However, the dungeon of the House of Randalt, which had been thoroughly fortified recently, embarrassed Bizarro's forces. A typical dungeon would have been already occupied, but a series of defense zones of the dungeon delayed their advance. The poison that arose from the floor melted the flesh of the advance party. The numerous javelins shooting from the corridors turned the forcibly mobilized arrow shields into something like hedgehogs. Goblins and kobolds, pushed to the forefront as arrow shields, cried out in fear, but they had nowhere to run away amid the arrows raining down on their heads. The lizard men, the backbone of Bizarro's forces, didn't hesitate to behead the runaways. Bizarro used the reckless method of destroying all the traps of the dungeon by using these arrow shields. Funny enough, however, this method worked quite well. The durability of the traps wasn't supposed to last forever. Bizarro's forces blocked the holes where the odor of the piled-up corpses was leaking out, and the javelins flying from the wall did not harm Bizarro's forces, who used the bodies of the killed goblins and kobolds as shields. Luckily for Bizarro, all the available javelins in the dungeon ran out. To make matters worse, the flames of the traps operated by mana had the same limits. Each time they shot the flames, poor kobolds and goblins were burned in droves, but the number of their shots was limited. The mana of the dungeon was not unlimited. Bizarro sacrificed nearly 300 goblins and kobolds in breaking through the traps in the dungeon. As a result, he succeeded in neutralizing most of the traps. Bizarro, the commander of the raid, did not even enter the dungeon of the House of Randalt. Positioning himself outside the dungeon along with his own men, Bizarro compiled the real-time information about the fighting results and drew a dungeon map of the House of Randalt. It was literally a messy dungeon. The shape of a dungeon differed according to its master, but its width and depth were usually the same. As an experienced head of a house, Bizarro could find out the size of the dungeon on the House of Randalt almost accurately. That was why he swore at its previous owner, astonished by the dungeon. The House of Randalt made more than 70 of its entire area as a defense area. Except for the dungeon spirit's living space for food, clothing, and shelter, there were virtually no other facilities. But it was almost over now. Although he sacrificed 300 out of the 700 soldiers he led, he could neutralize almost all of the dungeon traps. The only thing left now was the gathering ground, the final defense zone of the dungeon. Bizarro was sure of victory. So, he looked at the dungeon map comfortably. He waited for the victory news from his men inside the dungeon. Chapter 135. Sword of the House of Mammon. Too crazy bastard Tigrius cursed, which was something uncharacteristic of him. After observing the entire dungeon through the soul of the dungeon, he could not help but curse. Just as Bizarro was embarrassed by the fortification of the House of Randald, Tigrius was dumbfounded by Bizarro's tactics. Bizarro's way of attacking was far from reasonable. How could he dare to sacrifice hundreds of his own forces to destroy the dungeon traps? But he did, and his method paid off. At first glance, it was the least effective and the most reckless, but the final results were completely different. Most of those that were killed were goblins and kobolds that didn't play any other role than being arrow shields. Although they numbered about 300, Bizarro could protect his main forces from the attack with little damage. Moreover, it had to be taken into account that the purpose of the traps wasn't only to kill the enemy, but also to delay them. If Bizarro's forces had attempted to break through the traps in a normal way, they would have had to spend much more time and energy than now. The only hindrance that he had to break through was the gathering place. Although Rickham and the dungeon spirits were defending the final line of defense, they were outnumbered by Bizarro's forces. Despite the sacrifice of nearly 300 troops, Bizarro's forces still numbered over 400. Moreover, he had nearly 100 troops standing by outside the dungeon. In other words, Bizarro was a very meticulous guy. Therefore, it was impossible to ambush the commander of the enemy by using the secret passage of the dungeon. But Tigrius didn't give up. He went back to the secret passage by using Blink. He gave up the option of destroying each of the enemy forces in the dungeon, while Rickham and the dungeon spirits were playing the role of anvils at the gathering place. As things stood now, the gathering place was in danger of being taken over even before he destroyed them in the dungeon. Poison in the right hand, Gust in the left hand. He cast a spell while running. Pushing through the door of the secret passage, he put his hands together. Then he blew out the poisonous wind forward. A green wind with a tremendous amount of poison swept the lizardmen attacking the gathering ground. In an instant, more than a dozen lizardmen fell. Bleeding Tigrius Rickham came running to him, shouting. As if he was engaged in a fierce battle, he opened the way with a battle axe stained with the blood and flesh of lizardmen. The situation of the dungeon was worse than Tigrius expected. All of the traps installed in the gathering area were neutralized. The defensive positions were also almost completely destroyed amid the fierce battle between them. Tigrius, who was temporarily incapacitated in the aftermath of the combination magic, quickly raised his body. Rickham cut a lizardman's neck once again with the battle axe. "Come this way, I have to make space." Extreme fortification of the House of Randald simplified the rest of the space. What was located next to the gathering place was the heart of the dungeon. Tigrius smashed the head of a lizardman attacking him with his cane. At the same time, he ran toward Rickham and prepared a new spell. There weren't many spells available in a closed space where intense fighting was taking place at the moment. If he decided to use one, Tigrius had to be prepared to sacrifice friendly forces, just like Bizarro did Firewall in the right hand, Gust in the left hand. He wanted to sweep away the inside of the gathering area with the gust of flames, which would bring big damages to the friendly forces, but he had no other choice now. Rickham groaned. A lizardman's long spear pierced his shoulder. The orc, who was fighting right next to him, was wrapped in a steel net thrown by the lizardman. It was helplessly dragged along in an instant, and it turned into a piece of minced meat in no time. At that moment, Tigrius didn't hesitate anymore. He gathered magic in both hands. Combination magic, Firestorm. A huge wave of flames covered the inside of the gathering area. It engulfed not only the enemy but also the friendly force. But it was weird. The color of the flames was not red. Moreover, it wasn't even hot. The dungeon spirits of the House of Randald, engulfed in flames, screamed and struggled instinctively before stopping soon. Although the green flames engulfed them, they were not injured. On the other hand, the lizardmen that were caught in the same flames were dying. Tigrius looked at both of his hands in embarrassment. Firestorm was still in his hand. Some of the flying flames didn't flare up, swallowed up by the green flames. At that moment, Rickham shouted. All the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon shouted in joy. As if they were crazy, they quickly jumped into the green flames and roared. The Demon King of Flames Master. The green flame faded, and this time, the blade of black mana swept everywhere. Starting from the entrance of the gathering site, it ruthlessly hacked those lizardmen that barely survived the green flames. The dungeon spirits of the House of Randall could see now. Tigrius rejoiced to see his master, who finally arrived at the scene. "Master, you've kept the defense line very well until now, Tigrius," Yong-ho said with a smile. There were so many lizardmen in the gathering place that there were still lots of them who survived, despite the waves of flames and the whirls of black blades. But Yong-ho didn't care at all. Yong-ho wasn't even standing with reinforcements. Next to him was only one escort knight, who always accompanied him. But the lizardmen didn't dare to attack him. Although ogres were ignorant, they instinctively knew who was superior, so they stepped back, screaming. The battle didn't become more intense. Regardless of friendly forces or enemy, they didn't dare to fight. Tigrius released the mana he concentrated in both hands and thought for a moment. Yong-ho was a different man this time. He was not the kind of man that Tigrius had fought before. What the hell happened during this short period? Moreover, it was not only Yong-ho alone that changed. Tigrius, a demon king and wizard, did not miss the fact that it was Catalina who wielded the blade of black mana. That mana was much stronger than he imagined. Although he could not figure it out because mana was released instantly, he felt it seemed to be the same as his. Moreover, I felt some specialness embedded in mana, which he could not explain properly. Tigrius shook his head. Now was not the time for him to think about stuff like this. There were still many enemies. Outside the dungeon was Bizarro standing by with his elite forces. But Tigrius blinked at that moment because he felt something very strange. How could Yong-ho appear here? Every passage of the dungeon was filled with enemies, and outside the dungeon, Bizarro was standing by with his elite forces. Tigrius looked at Yong-ho. Instead of explaining to him, Yong-ho laughed heartily. Realizing something, Tigrius swallowed. He urgently called the soul of the dungeon and ordered it to explain what the dungeon meerkat saw. Tigrius shuddered, astonished. Only 4 men were destroying Bizarro's army, numbering 100. Demon King of Rain. Bizarro couldn't understand the current situation. Only a dozen minutes ago, he was waiting for the good news about victory while sitting in the shade. However, something unknown poured down from the sky with a terrifying force. There was a lot of dirt, and when it settled, the only thing he could see was the bodies of 5 or 6 mangled lizardmen. When he was distracted by that, there were a couple of explosions in the left and right of the 100 elite soldiers standing in a row. It was a terrific explosion. On the right, thunder and lightning stroke, and on the left, there occurred something very strange, such as lizardmen soaring into the sky in groups as if they were going against gravity. It was a pitch-black knight on a black horse that seemed to be wielding the weapon of lightning, and it was a huge red monster with black horns that threw the lizardmen into the sky as if it were a storm. Bizarro couldn't issue any order to his elite forces. He couldn't open his mouth because he was so embarrassed by the sudden situation. And his embarrassing inaction could not be blamed. Even if he had issued any order at that moment, the situation would not have changed. The last lizardman that fought to the end without fleeing was thrown into the air. The red-skinned muscular giant, rather a beast who threw the lizardman weighing more than 200 kilograms with a single punch, approached Bizarro, letting out a breath reminiscent of purgatory smoke. Turning white, Bizarro shuddered. Although he kept thinking he had to run away, he couldn't move even a finger. As if his tendon was cut off, Bizarro's arms were drooping without moving, and his legs were bent at a bizarre angle and could not function properly. It was one of the 4 that smashed Bizarro's elite forces, wrapped in black mana that fluttered like flames. It stood alone and looked down at Bizarro, who fell on the floor. The beautifully raised buttocks and narrow waistline obviously showed it was a beautiful woman. But its face was far from a woman. More specifically speaking, it had no face at all. There was something that looked like eyes, but they were nothing more than something like a metallic mask. All black, it was literally a weapon. With the black mana arising from its whole body, it not only cut lizardmen, but also Bizarros. Both arms. Bizarro caught his breath. Even though his whole body was covered with wounds, he still had power. If he could release the power that empowered him as the name, the Demon King of Rain, he could escape, rather struggle desperately. Don't think of anything. The person that smashed Bizarro's legs burst into laughter. It was exactly 2, not 4, who defeated 100 lizardmen, while a black knight on a black horse and a huge red monster smashed the lizardmen. Bizarro could not help them out because his feet were bound by 2 women. He had to confront them who were equal or superior to him in fighting. One of them, a red demon woman, trampled his thigh hard. He struggled again in terrible pain, and the red demon, Ophelia, pressed down his shoulder with both arms. Licking her lower lip, she said, "This is your last moment, so I hope you can enjoy it enough." This time, again, something that Bizarro could not understand happened. With her eyes half closed, Ophelia kissed Bizarro. He felt it was soft and sweet, but at the same time, he got goosebumps. He lost consciousness, though very briefly, but he immediately felt that the moment he faced Ophelia, who breathed out seductively after kissing with her lower lip, he let her read his mind. But there was no time for him to worry about it. A huge shadow came over him, covering not only him, but also Ophelia on top of him. It roared like a beast. It was displaying a clear hostility toward him. With a smile, Ophelia stepped back. A giant red beast, Eligos, who turned into a beast, clenched his two fists reminiscent of a giant hammer. Bizarro could no longer remember what happened after that. Chapter 136, Sword of the House of Mammon 3. Brother Ellis' jealousy was far stronger than I thought. As if she felt shy, Ophelia covered her face with her hand, blurring her words. And Eligos, who stood next to her, shook his head, pressing on his temple as if his head was pounding, and said, "I can't remember." However, given that his red skin was getting redder, Eligos seemed to admit it. As if he understood, Yong-ho patted Eligos on the shoulder and looked down at Bizarro's mangled body. Although he had the fourth recently, he had 4 horns, but he met his last moment very tragically. Yong-ho lightly joined his hands together and prayed for his rest in peace, then took his essence. The larger the difference between one's mana and the others, the worse its efficiency, so he couldn't take much from Bizarro. Nonetheless, Yong-ho felt a bit of thrill. Phew! Yong-ho looked back at the smashed lizardmen soldiers and admired the great achievement that only 4, rather 2, made in the fight. Promoted as Red Demon Tyrant, Eligos acquired a new ability called Beast, as Yong-ho expected. His new title exactly reflected his new ability. As soon as he empowered himself, Eligos turned into a beast. At first glance, he looked like a gorilla. Both arms, tightly fused with muscles, looked like iron pillars, and his fists were reminiscent of the weight of heavy equipment for destroying buildings. White hairs with gray color grew out of not only his head, but also chest, arms, thighs, and other areas where hair could grow, making him look like a real beast. Eligos, in his beastly shape, was truly the monster of the House of Mammon. Aside from his images as a monster, Eligos' endless strength was impressive, as evidenced in the House of Mammon and the House of Randalt. Yong-ho himself and Catalina got on Salami Skull rode on Bucephalus, and Ophelia got on the back of Eligos, who turned into a beast. Although they took a few breaks in the middle, they smashed the lizardman, feeling no fatigue after traveling such a long distance. Skull was promoted from Magic Knight to Eldritch Knight. In fact, Skull made the most surprising achievement in this battle. When Yong-ho evolved Skull last time, he was not sure when he could promote Skull, but this time he could see it. Moreover, Skull's ability to evolve also increased. Even his level changed. Obviously, Skull changed before and after fighting Baphomet. Although Skull could not discover what changed as it was getting around casually as usual, Yong-ho doubted one possibility. Perhaps did Skull feel something from death? Perhaps Skull recovered some of its former self before becoming the undead. After becoming an Eldritch Knight, Skull became stronger overall. It was now nearly 2 meters tall, and despite having only bones, it unleashed terrifying power. Its mana was also stronger, so it could use lightning much more powerful than his days as a Magic Knight. Skull could not wear the armor that Bergrim had made because of the different dimensions. Therefore, the armor protected only part of its arms and legs, chest, and back. Fortunately, the helmet could be used as it was. What Skull chose as the replacement of the broken battle hammer was a relatively short new battle hammer and a huge claymore. Both were magical weapons that Bergrim had used before. Ophelia kept smiling at Eligos as if she liked his shyness. Promoted to the Red Demon Breaker, she also gained beast skills like Eligos. However, her beast skills were different from Eligos. It was true that she became more militant, but there was something elegant about her, reminiscent of a feline beast. Her appearance didn't change that much either. Chwiryong said the reason for this difference was that the two had different temperaments in the first place. but it was mainly because they were affected by Yongho's preferences, just like their appearances after evolution was influenced by Yongho's thinking. Finally, Catalina was promoted from Shadowrunner to Shadow Mistress. As the owner of the Shadow, she could create her own alter ego with black mana. One of the four who smashed Bizarro's army was none other than her alter ego. The only drawback was that her alter ego would disappear naturally if it was too far away from Catalina, and that if Catalina did not directly manipulate it, its behavior pattern would be too simplified. But she could deal with it without any problem. It was when Catalina and her alter ego fought together in the same place when her alter ego could unleash its power fully. Currently, Catalina had limited ability to control her alter ego, so her alter ego only imitated Catalina. But even that was powerful because there was plenty of room for its application, such as delayed attacking or simultaneous attacks from various angles. After disassembling her shadow alter ego, she patted her ears lightly. It seemed that she felt quite a sense of accomplishment in this battle. Yongho laughed bitterly again. Sorry. Originally, Catalina used to move her ears more actively compared to other elves, but it was thanks to Yongho's evolution that she advanced as far as here. In other words, his subconscious wishes that he wanted to see more of her cute ears made him evolve her skills. But Yongho kept mum about it according to Guxian's advice, and looked at her tail. It certainly seemed to be moving more briskly than it did before her advancement. Well, she had lots of other improvements anyway. For example, her figure was one of them. Of course, since it reflected Yongho's tastes, it was questionable whether Catalina would like her own figure. After completely absorbing Bizarro's essence, Yongho faced Ophelia again. While teasing Eligos until now, she got serious again and said, I read Bizarro's mind and got some information. Bizarro was the chief of the advance party that attacked the House of Randald. Currently, Embryo himself is leading his main forces to the southern area. It seems that Embryo is planning to attack the east after penetrating through the south at once and it seems that Embryo thought he would easily take over the House of Randald with Bizarro as the head of the advance party. It looks like the House of Randald is a piece of cake to him. Yongho laughed bitterly, but he understood Bizarro led as many as 700 soldiers. If Yongho himself had not come to help out Tigrius, or if he had arrived a little late, the House of Randald would have been captured in the end. How many are Embryo's main forces? At that question, Ophelia narrowed her brow slightly. She hesitated for a moment and said, around 4,000, I guess. There are about 1,000 elite soldiers who have followed Embryo from the north. Yongho closed his eyes tightly. He understood why Embryo underestimated the southern region. Currently, the number of troops the House of Mammon could mobilize was 1,000 at most, even if all the troops of the Free City joined them. But the gap between the troops was not big enough for Yongho not to overcome. Although he was ridiculously inferior to Embryo in the number of troops, he had confidence that he would never be outpowered by Embryo in terms of the quality and competence of his men. The war in the demon world was different from the ones in the human world in many ways, which Yongho discovered in history. It was because there existed the owners of transcendent combat power. The number of Embryo's horns is at least 5. Embryo devoured not only almost all the heads of houses in the west, but also those in the north. Having eaten them all, he would have at least 5 horns, given his enormous absorption of their essence. Yongho stopped thinking about it anymore. He looked back at Tigrius, who couldn't help but admire the dungeon spirits that were so different from what he had seen last time. Troops of the Free City and Skull Squad led by Oros are coming from the rear. So, let's get rid of the enemy's bodies piled up in the dungeon and realign our forces. Got it, Master Tigrius nodded. However, he couldn't completely hide the anguish around his eyes. Although the defense of the House of Randald was remarkably strengthened with complete fortification, it was trampled by only 700 soldiers led by Bizarro. Given that Embryo's main troops numbered 400, he wondered how Yongho and his reinforcements could stop them. Yongho also understood Tigrius' concerns. However, he did not want to give up before fighting. Tigrius felt the same way. Too, Tigrius, I have one suggestion. I hope you think it over well before replying. I won't mind if you refuse to answer. Yongho spoke, and this time Tigrius read his mind. I want you to be the dungeon spirit of the House of Mammon this time. His suggestion was what Tigrius expected. It was largely for two reasons that Yong-ho did not make Tigrius a dungeon spirit until now. First, in order to effectively proceed with the fortification of the House of Randald, it was necessary to have someone like him who could order the souls of the dungeon in the field. Second, Yong-ho himself could not afford to make Tigrius a dungeon spirit back then. Now, he solved both problems. And now he needed one more powerful dungeon spirit, rather than the Demon King under his command. Yong-ho's suggestion was that Tigrius should give up the status of the Demon King. Since he played the role of the head of the House of Randald, he would not lose his power, but the weakening of his power was inevitable. He had to give up the house now. Tigrius slowly closed his eyes. It was something he was prepared for when he was defeated in the battle. Moreover, he was interested in becoming a dungeon spirit of the House of Mammon. How strong could he be? Where would the power of evolution that he heard from Ophelia lead him? "Let me accept your command, master." To his own surprise, Tigrius responded cheerfully. Yong-ho took his hands with deep gratitude, and 3 days later, Yong-ho, who confirmed the movement of Embryo's main forces through the scouts, gathered all the dungeon spirits in his room. Because the living space of the dungeon was reduced drastically by excessive fortification, the Demon King's room was also narrow. The only furniture in the room was just one bed, so when the 5 dungeon spirits gathered in one place, there was only a little space left. The reason that he gathered them was to convey his own tactics that he had been pondering over for the past few days. But there was one thing he had to do first, namely, he had to invite Tigrius as the 7th member as a dungeon spirit. Sitting on the bed, he took out a summons from his pocket. Each of the 4, who already knew the subject of the summons, made different expressions, and Tigrius was looking at the summons alone seriously. Yong-ho let out a long breath. After deciding firmly, he tore the summons to free his mana. And the one who appears thus, the one who descends beyond the constraints of the arena, as well as time and space. Her grey hair fluttered in the strong wind. There was mischievousness in her ferocious eyes. The head of the House of Mammon 3 generations ago, Kaiwan, the Demon King of Distortion. "So, have you come up with any wishes for me this time?" Standing askew, she asked teasingly, licking her lips lightly. Yong-ho smiled bitterly instead of answering. He welcomed her with open arms. She would be the joker in his fight against Embryo, as well as his 6th sword. Chapter 137. Rebellion. King Embryo 1. Bizarro, the Demon King of Rain, didn't come back from the battle, nor did the 7 soldiers led by him. It was because his forces were virtually annihilated. His soldiers who infiltrated the dungeon of the House of Randald could not get out of it. None of the 100 elite lizardmen who guarded Bizarro outside the dungeon ran away, as if to demonstrate their loyalty and courage, and were literally annihilated. Since there was none who could convey the bad news to him, Embryo didn't know what happened in the dungeon, but there was one thing he knew for sure, which was that the Demon King of Rain, Bizarro, died. The evidence that the soul of the dungeon he was in charge of perished confirmed it. Embryo wondered how Bizarro died. Bizarro was the master of a house in the northern area. He had 4 horns, but he just advanced to that level. His combat competence was mediocre, and his personality was good enough. He was far from hot-tempered, nor was he stupid enough to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. If he had been such a person, Embryo himself would not have spared his life. Of course, there could be no absolute survival in battle. It was possible that Bizarro was killed by a stray arrow or sword. But Embryo could not imagine such a scenario easily. When something happened, there was supposed to be some plausible reason for it. It was never common for a rat to kill a cat. Did the head of the House of Mammon kill him? Embryo wondered, what if the house head himself defended the House of Randald and took Bizarro's life? It was this man who defeated Igaris. Although Embryo had never faced him in person, it was highly likely that this man had more than 4 horns. But Embryo still could not understand why nobody out of the 600 soldiers, apart from Bizarro and his loyal 100 lizardmen, didn't return from the dungeon. Were they all annihilated? If that was the case, perhaps the House of Mammon was much more powerful than Embryo himself expected. Embryo pondered over what to do now. It was ridiculous for him to withdraw his forces now. Moreover, even if the House of Mammon was more powerful than he expected, Embryo thought they were obviously not stronger than his forces. In his mind, the House of Mammon couldn't have been stronger than the Western Owners Alliance. It was true that the head of the House of Mammon took the essence of those heads of houses in the southern area after defeating them. But it was only a couple of them whose essence he took. If he had been strong, his absorption of their essence would not have been good enough to result in his dramatic growth. If he had been born weak, he must have had the fourth horn only recently. Of course, there was a possibility that the master of the House of Mammon was a man with superhuman strength. If that was the case, Embryo couldn't understand his behavior pattern up to now. For the Mammon master slowly took over the hegemony of the southern area after struggling in various battles. There was only one master in the House of Mammon now, and the most soldiers he could mobilize was around 100. Certainly, it was incomparable to the Western Owners' Alliance with a dozen masters of houses and nearly 7,000 troops were going to attack the southern region as planned. Embryo's command was conveyed to his commanders. Except for the 1,000 troops that left for the north as supporting units, the remaining 3,000 troops resumed their march to the south. Since there was no table in the room, Yong-ho laid out a map of the front lines on the floor and explained the tactic he devised. It was never complicated. It was a very simple tactic. It took about 30 minutes for him to brief his dungeon spirits about it. Cross-legged on the floor, Kaiwen looked sharply at the map with her arms crossed, and soon she rolled her eyes and met his eyes. "I've been thinking about it." "So, you must be crazy, seriously." Having said that bluntly, Kaiwen laughed as if his tactic was absurd. Since her look was so ferocious, it looked like she was ridiculing him. But Yong-ho, who always appreciated her selfless smile, understood the true meaning of her laugh. Of course, Kaiwen had no intention of ridiculing or denouncing him. She thought his tactic was rather absurd, but at the same time she admired it. A bit, Yong-ho chuckled at her comment that he was crazy. As if to avoid her gaze, he rolled his eyes to see other dungeon spirits. Elagos was looking at the map with a blank expression. Ophelia tried hard to make a smile, and Catalina, puckering her lips, was looking at Kaiwen. It seemed that she was more bothered by Kaiwen ridiculing Yong-ho as a crazy man than by his tactic itself. Skull chuckled as usual. The purple ghost flames in its hollow eyes gave out a calm impression, but it still felt like a skull. Yong-ho, who was nervous about the various changes in Skull these days, let out a breath of relief briefly. Lastly, Tigrius, who joined the House of Mammon as its fifth dungeon spirit, did not betray his expectations. He said calmly, "It's definitely a reckless tactic, but it seems your tactic is the best at this point. You will never be able to beat Embryo by simply holding up in the dungeon." Ophelia added, "I agree with Tigrius and Ant." When Yong-ho asked back, Ophelia narrowed her brows as if she was embarrassed and replied, "It seems like the tactic fits your personality well." "I'll take that as a compliment," said Yong-ho with a smile. Yong-ho then looked at Kaiwen again. She unfolded his arms and touched the floor with both hands. Leaning back, she said, "Well, since I've been summoned as your dungeon spirit, I've no other choice but to follow your order. Like Ophelia just said, the tactic seems to fit your personality. I can feel something like your cunningness or meticulousness that you have shown in the arena. I think your tactic is better than that. Honestly, I really like it." When Yong-ho visited the arena last time, he did not challenge the 11th floor. Instead of obsessing with the mana of Mammon or the rewards of the arena, he was seeing the bigger picture. The dungeon spirits moved under Yong-ho's control. They didn't even think of challenging the floor that required their utmost strength. They challenged those floors only that they could win comfortably enough to satisfy the evolution EXP. As a result, Catalina, Ophelia, and Skull only challenged up to the 3rd floor, and Elagos only challenged the 2nd floor. Although each of the dungeon spirits was strong enough to challenge higher floors because of their 4 horns equal to their master, Yong-ho never allowed it. Despite his status as the king of greed, Yong-ho exercised moderation in a strange place. Gusyeon blamed him for that, but liked it at the same time. On the other hand, Kaiwen thought their behavior was really surprising. However, this tactic was truly befitting Yong-ho. At the same time, it was obviously reckless. She could feel his conviction in victory with this tactic. That's why he did it before. By using the power of evolution during a battle, Yong-ho evolved himself. She witnessed it in front of her eyes, but she thought his action was absurd when she thought about it even now. When she noticed Kaiwan's sharp glance at him turning agreeable, Catalina pricked her ears. Fortunately or unfortunately, no one paid attention to her ears, though. Tigrias said again, "Even if your tactic is successful, you will incur heavy casualties. I am not sure if this crazy Commander Oros can effectively control the freewheeling troops of the Free City." A bit worried. The situation this time was different from when they fought Agare's army in the Free City. Ophelia replied on behalf of Yong-ho, "It will be all right. Nobody in the Free City army knows that the western region was devastated, so they have every motivation to fight. Moreover, Oros will fight well. You don't have to worry." Although Ophelia spoke calmly, she had a point. It was natural that she showed such a reaction as one of the dungeon spirits at the House of Mammon and one of the heads of the Free City. Instead of colliding with her about it unnecessarily, Tigrias backed off. Yong-ho was satisfied with the fact that the dungeon spirits were coordinating among themselves well without him bothering to reconcile their opinion. "Ophelia, convey to Rikum and Oros about my decision." Tigrias, double-check the defense posture of the dungeon. Skull, have your squadron stand by. Given the speed of Embryo marching his army to the south, you have to get them leaving tomorrow morning. "I'm sorry for all this, but make sure you get enough rest." All of them responded to him by politely accepting his order. "Then, what about me?" Kaiwan asked. Although they were faced with a life-threatening battle, they could not stay nervous forever. Standing up, Yong-ho told Kaiwan, "Let's go to the restaurant and eat something. It's like you're here on vacation in decades, right? There is nothing to eat in the arena anyway." Yong-ho said that, although he never experienced an army life, Kaiwan smiled brightly at his reply while blinking, curious about what he was going to say. "Well, I would like to grant 2 wishes for you, not 1. By the way, when are you going to ask for it? Why are you so lazy in letting me know about it? Is it a big wish?" Yong-ho smiled bitterly at her question. Instead of replying, he said to Kaiwan while gesturing with his chin, "Let's go." Kaiwan stood up readily. Then Catalina, who also stood up before she knew it, moved her lips. Was she going to say the same thing as she did in the arena? Kaiwan stroked her hair as if she was cute. Thanks to that, Catalina curled her lips suddenly while trying to say something. Yong-ho also stroked Catalina's hair. Kaiwan laughed. "She is cute too." "You bet she is cute and pretty." Agreeing with her a bit awkwardly, he left the room ahead of Kaiwan. Unlike Ophelia, who looked at him weirdly, Yong-ho appreciated Tigrias very much, who turned his eyes away from him elegantly. Chapter 138. Rebellion King Embryo 2. Days and nights changed one after another. Embryo's army, finally crossing the borders between the west and the south, was approaching the dungeon of the House of Randalt. Fast Embryo didn't rush. Riding on a giant wolf instead of a horse, he turned his gaze aside. Lotus, the demon king of wild animals, one of the housemasters under his command, replied politely, "There is a group of troops ambushed in the right rear of the dungeon of the House of Randalt. About 600, all told. Given that their arming posture is not organized, it seems they are from the Free City." As the name suggested, Lotus could freely control wild animals and even shared their senses. Embryo nodded. He didn't expect their defense posture was poor like that. It was unlikely that the master of the House of Mammon, whose troops were absolutely inferior, would retreat. To make matters worse, since the master could not place all his troops in the mid-sized dungeon of the Hosu of Randalt, it was highly likely that he had them, ready to ambush Embryo's army. "Move forward like we did." While attacking the dungeon of the House of Randalt, his forces were in danger of being ambushed, but Embryo didn't worry that much. His forces were different from Bizarro's in terms of the size of the troops. Even though Embryo mobilized 1,000 troops to attack the dungeon, he still had 2,000 troops on standby. Now, Embryo kept gesturing to Lotus. After understanding his signal, Lotus bowed out politely and headed to the left wing of his main forces. Then he turned the marching course of the light infantry troops composed of orcs and lizardmen slightly, for the target of his attack was not the dungeon, but the forces of the Free City in ambush behind it. Orc warrior Kijamu, commander of the main unit's heavy infantry, accelerated the march. Of the 500 troops located in the center of the main unit, about 900 people, more than half of them, followed his command. consisting of heavy infantry and arrow shields. Their main mission was to attack the dungeon of the House of Randolt. The remaining forces left behind were 600 light infantry, who were reserve units. Moreover, there were troops on the right wing of the main unit, dozens of cavalry, headed by a death knight riding on a giant lizard running on 2 legs, and about 500 light infantry stopped marching like Embryo's main forces and kept their place. The fighting began from a distance. The light infantry led by Lotus clashed with the forces of the Free City. Since their ambush was exposed to the Lotus army, the Free City soldiers had no tactical advantage at all. They were just struggling to fight back the Lotus light infantry that numbered almost twice as much as them. Kijamu didn't pay attention to Lotus fighting. His heavy infantry, with scared goblins and kobolds attacking ahead, stormed into the dungeon. Embryo just watched his commanders leading the fight, instead of leading the forces by himself, as he did when fighting the Western Owners Alliance. This time, he took his time and just waited. He heard the clattering of horses' hooves behind his back. Again, it was as he expected. In the current situation, there were not many things the master of the House of Mammon could do. Embryo felt that the master would try to divert his attention to the troops in the front line, then have his own elite forces attack the main forces led by Embryo's commander in the rear. Embryo could clearly understand how Pizarro was defeated. Perhaps he was defeated by the same tactic. The wolves turned. The elite soldiers mixed among the reserves calmed their confusion. Embryo burst into laughter after noticing a group of soldiers running to him at a distance. 20 of them at most. Each one of them was an elite soldier, but their number was too small. It was like hitting a rock with eggs. Was he crazy? Embryo raised his hand. He didn't even have to go out. Death Knight, who was standing by on his right, could handle them alone. But at that moment, the air of the battlefield changed. Terrible mana was released from the elite soldiers of the House of Mammon, who were rushing like a moth running into the flames. As the attack was so sudden, Embryo was at a loss about what to do. His main unit was dealt a strong blow. Kahum. It was a beast's roar. Huge red monsters that penetrated into his main forces threw them into the sky, wielding their arms violently. The red beast on the monsters' backs commanded them with a single flash of light. But the cavalry of the House of Mammon didn't charge at Embryo's main unit. The pitch-black nightmare, flying in the lead, turned to the right when the red monster and the beast revealed their claws. The cavalry rushed toward the Death Knight. Lightning struck, and gusts arose fiercely, protecting the cavalry. Moreover, the mana unleashed by each of them was exceptionally powerful. Extreme confusion dominated Embryo's main unit. However, he couldn't think of quelling the confusion. He didn't even look at the Death Knight, who was about to collide with the pitch-dark night. When Embryo and his men were distracted by the ambush of the House of Mammon, they suddenly raised their heads. Embryo glared his eyes before he knew it. Under the red sky of the demon world, there was another sun. A huge and intense lump of green flames flared up. Embryo could not afford to think about where they suddenly appeared or how they hid mana. The red monsters, apparently under the master's command, were raging inside his main unit. Embryo hastily opened up his mana Yong-ho, standing on the back of Salami, roared and brandished Armon. The sun of the green flames hit the ground. Embryo's army witnessed a disaster pouring out from the sky. Those who witnessed their colleagues' heads being smashed by the red monster's fists, those who screamed to overcome their fear, and those who tried to run away instinctively raised their heads and looked at the sky. It was beautiful. The green flames exploding under the red sky of the demon world were luxurious, glamorous, and mysterious, but they couldn't admire it because the flame was alive. The sun of green flames that hit the ground turned into dozens, rather hundreds of flames. They covered the sky and the earth and colored the whole world green. Sparks of the flames scattering like petals turned into fatal weapons and struck Embryo's army. He spread the map of hell on the ground. Those who were engulfed in flames screamed painfully. The moment the sun of green flames hit the ground, its heat and shock instantly killed nearly 100 soldiers. The remaining survivors were also swept away by a wave of sparks from the source of the shock. Yong-ho looked down at all this from the sky. Although they couldn't destroy all of Embryo's main unit and his right-wing troops that didn't move, the ambush already achieved a lot. Nearly 200 troops were incapacitated by the attack, and the battlefield was thrust into an extreme chaos. But Yong-ho felt his attack wasn't sufficient. The attack was just a killer punch. He really had to prepare for lots of stuff for this attack. He concentrated mana for about 30 minutes. At the same time, Chwiryong used the power of distortion non-stop for 30 minutes so that he couldn't have his abnormally concentrated mana caught by Embryo. She distorted the flow of mana in the atmosphere adroitly to hide his mana. Added to this was Tigreus illusion magic. Thanks to this, Yong-ho wasn't even caught in the eyes of Lotus, the demon king of wild animals. Lastly, Skull, Tigreus, Eligos, and Ophelia mounted a combined attack. While Embryo and his army's eyes were fixed on the ambush, Yong-ho soared on the back of Salami. Of course, he had to distract Embryo's attention even during that short span, so Chwiryong, on Salami's back like Yong-ho, did her best to use the power of distortion to deceive Embryo. Then came the killer attack by Yong-ho and his dungeon spirits. Without any regret, Yong-ho breathed harshly and drank the mana potion he had obtained from the arena. So did Chwiryong, exhausted. After using the power of distortion for about 30 minutes, she tried to recover mana instead of looking down on the ground. Yong-ho's attack just began. There were still many enemies, and Embryo was well and alive. "Ooh-hoo!" Eligos roared in the flames that covered the ground. He literally ran around like he was crazy. The flames of greed never harmed Yong-ho's possession. Eligos. As a result, Eligos wasn't afraid of the flames at all. Rather, Eligos actively used the flames. While being faithful to his wild nature, Eligos freely used the skills he acquired so far. The storm of power. Whenever he wielded his punches amid the green flames, enemies, blood splattered and bones scattered everywhere. A terrifying noise of breaking and destruction resonated in all directions. Ophelia ran silently. If Eligos was a storm in the air, she was lightning on the ground. She was fast and intense. Moreover, her attack didn't know distance. A shockwave that she caused by kicking in the air broke the atmosphere and crushed the ground with a strike. The role of the two red demons was to break the backbone of Embryo's main unit. Accordingly, they didn't stop for a moment. They didn't forget that the moment Yong-ho's green flames disappeared, he would be exposed among the 1,000 troops Skull's unit penetrated the troops on the right wing of Embryo. They suffered relatively less damage from the green flames, but it didn't mean their resistance to lance charging was reinforced. The giant black horses carrying Skull's troops on their backs guaranteed the unusual impact and racing power of the cavalry. They immediately trampled on the light infantry in Embryo's right wing. Penetrating the infantry squad with lance charging was a standard military tactic. The moment they stopped moving, the cavalry was no longer a cavalry. For this reason, Skull's squad penetrated Embryo's right wing. They ran diagonally and got out of the place except for one, Skull Lull. However, Skull didn't penetrate the right wing. Skull immediately ordered its unit's members to get around and charge again at the right wing. Skull then turned the head of the horse. Skull drove a horse face to face to the one who rushed forward without turning his gaze even when the sun of the green flames was pouring down. Bucephalus exuded a hot, harsh snort. Skull also roared wildly, grabbing Claymore, which was embedded with lightning. The Death Knight. He was one of the prized figures of the undead monsters. Chapter 139. Rebellion King. Embryo 3. The Death Knight held an unusually huge Zweihander in his hand. Wrapped around in pitch-black armor, he fluttered a red cloak and released a wicked energy. It was overwhelming. It was a terrifying energy indeed. The wicked energy was so intense that Embryo's army near the path of the Death Knight screamed in painful groaning. It wasn't an enemy that an ordinary undead monster could deal with. It was in a different league from the start. But Skull didn't back down. It sharply stared at the Death Knight with Bucephalus and glared its purple eyes even more. The wicked energy of the Death Knight. It didn't matter. Skull didn't care. Claymore screamed from Skull's hand. Skull Brigada shined. Skull brought out not only the mana of greed, but also other power. It was death. It was the power of Baphomet, the demon of slaughter, and one of the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon. Lightning was added to death. The mighty power to tear even the wicked energy of the Death Knight was present in Skull's Claymore. The Death Knight also didn't back down. He rather smiled at Skull's power. A great warrior when he was alive, he laughed like crazy and frantically wielded Zweihander at Skull. The moment they were compressed against each other, and the moment they stopped moving, the two warriors who returned from death looked at each other. They clashed violently. Embryo didn't look away. When the son of the green flames hit the ground, he opened all of his 5 horns. It wasn't the time for him to hide his power fumblingly. The huge mana he released instantly became a barrier in itself. It easily blocked the waves of the green flames raining down in dozens of strands. Embryo saw the essence of the son of the green flames. Despite death rising to overtake him from all sides, he analyzed it. It was strong. Even if that was the master's all power, his evaluation didn't change. Embryo erased everything from his mind that he had expected of the House of Mammon so far, and he closed his eyes. There were 2 red daemons running around like crazy. They were also strong. Each of them could be compared to Plauros, the strongest in the Western Owners Alliance. An undead monster, apparently from the House of Mammon, was confronting the Death Knight. It was a pretty tight fight between them, and this kind of fight was far beyond Emilbio's expectation. There were already 3 players comparable to Plauros. In addition, the master of the House of Mammon was much stronger than them. Were they all? Embryo opened his eyes. Once again, he released powerful mana to put out the green flames around him. He saw 2 women as if they were dancing down from the sky. Chwiryong was gorgeous. She damaged the world with a whip sword that stretched to dozens of meters in length. The dark red mana that bloomed under her gray hair spread out in all directions. Catalina was sharp. She could be called as good as the blade of black mana. She landed on the ground, cutting through the air, and cut everything standing in the way by scattering blades of black mana in all directions. Then she cleaned the place where her king would stand, and there was one who landed on the ground between the 2 women. He was holding the spear of the red lotus, revealing his 5 horns without hesitation. He was still far away from Embryo. There were more than 100 troops in between. Embryo looked into Youngho's eyes. Youngho also didn't avoid his gaze. Embryo realized something. It wasn't how strong the master of the House of Mammon was, or how he created his current power. What Embryo realized was what he had to do in the future. Right now, at this moment, the fight here would determine the fate of the southern area. The eastern region was still intact, but in the end, it was only a stepping stone for his advance. The land where the greatest king of greed was born. Who would rise up again in the land? Who would succeed? The genealogy of the great King Embryo ordered the attack, and his command resonated in the sky. Mobilize whatever you can. Do your best in this fight, because this is a fight worth fighting for. This time, Youngho raised his head. Although he was facing Embryo, he looked at the sky instinctively. Catalina groaned. Chwiryong opened her mouth wide. What was coming down from the sky? Even at the moment when Youngho created the son of the green flames, there was something watching the ground from a higher place. Huge wings covered the sky. Death came down. Crazy Oros fought with all his might. Embryo's army was almost twice that of the Free City. Moreover, Oros forces were inferior to them qualitatively, let alone quantitatively. Embryo's army boasted of their most fighting experiences in the southern blank. The bums in the Free City also had lots of fighting experiences, but the nature of their fighting was different. A tight, dense formation by Embryo's army pressed the freewheeling formation of the Free City troops. The bums in the Free City, who were not accustomed to this kind of fight, eventually had to choose to survive rather than fight to kill their enemies. So Oros came out to the forefront. It wasn't a situation in which he would command them in the rear. After all, Oros was tasked with keeping the enemy at bay. What he needed at this moment wasn't a cold-hearted commander, but a mad troll who would smash the enemy's bones in the front line. He smashed an orc's head with a stick. He killed the goblins rushing without fear by trampling on them. He then swallowed drugs which maximized not only the troll's unique regenerative power, but also strengthened all the functions of his body. Regardless of friendly or enemy forces, they were killed here and there. Oros looked everywhere with glittering eyes. Since the drug was working, Oros let out a breath roughly and shouted. Right at that moment, the son of the green flames hit the ground. The intense shock lasted only for a moment, but it stopped all fighting. orc warrior Kajamas heavy infantry, who were beating the dungeon spirits of the House of Randalt hard, looked toward their main unit blankly. So did Lotus, the king of wild animals, who was in the thick of slaughtering the Free City troops. Oros laughed. He was in doubt when he heard it first, but now he could trust it sincerely. He was sure he could win the fight, but when he believed so, the sky opened. Something more intense than the sun of green flames made everybody look up at the sky. There was something he had never seen before, but everybody knew what it was. Oros stepped back. He was more than a few hundred meters from it, but he made eye contact with it. Staring at Oros himself, it spread its huge wings. No, someone shouted, and that was it. The dragon descended over the forces of the Free City. Although it was fooled by death, it breathed out the power of the great King of One, called Dragon Breath. What was the strongest among the numerous races in the demon world? There were lots of disagreements about it. Given that there were big individual differences even among the same race in the demon world, such disagreements were taken for granted. However, whenever they mentioned it, they never failed to mention this race. Dragon. The descendants of the great King of One, who had inherited the fantastic veins of water. Some called them the king of all wild beasts and birds. Others said their very existence was a miracle. They were strong. When fully grown, they were dozens of meters tall, and they were very tough. Their muscles were transcendent, and the scales were firm. Despite their large body and weight, they could freely roam the sky. Dragons' bones, teeth, and claws were compared to the hardest metal in the demon world. Aside from their mighty physical power, their inherent mana was also extraordinarily powerful. To talk about the average mana of each race, the dragons were the best in the demon world. As if their skills were insufficient, the dragons also had various other skills. Some of them had superpowers compared to the power of the Masters of House's dragon. Some called them perfect beings, and the ultimate weapons they possessed, the primitive power inherited from that great King of One. Dragon breath, or breath weapon, it was pouring down from the sky now. It was a lump of power embedded with terrible, wicked energy. It was purple. Crazy Oros couldn't know more than that. He was crushed by its overwhelming power without defending himself or avoiding it. Like the sun of the green flames, the breath weapon exploded as soon as it hit the ground. The purple, wicked energy covered dozens of meters in diameter and annihilated all that existed in it. A huge thing, which was dozens of meters long from head to feet, was floating in the air. That alone was amazing, but it really unleashed an overwhelming power. The battlefield froze. Embryo's army and the soldiers of the Free City looked at the dragon, forgetting the fight. They instinctively covered themselves, and what happened immediately afterward astonished everyone again. The dragon threw itself on the ground. Its descent, which could be called a freefall, was an attack in itself. The ground shook, as if there was an earthquake. Numerous soldiers were crushed by its giant body. The dragon moved. Rotating its body roughly, it swept the ground with its tail. Dozens of soldiers again died in its simple attack. The dragon roared, then turned around, releasing a terrible, wicked energy. Its dreadful eyes glared threateningly. It wasn't necessary to tell friendly forces from enemies in this situation. The soldiers of the Free City couldn't move like a frog in front of a snake. Embryo's army was no exception. Even though the dragon didn't do any harm, they were seized with fear instinctively. This is the dragon. It's undead. So it's weak, weaker than when it was alive. It doesn't have any special skills. So, don't be scared. Somebody spoke quickly. It was none other than Kaiwan. She was wary of the dragon that she saw with stiff expression, and Embryo at the same time. She had a point. This dragon was weaker than a living dragon. This dragon, which could be called a sort of skeleton, lost many powerful weapons unique to the dragon. The scales harder than any armor were no longer present in it. In the process of falling as an undead, it lost most of its skills, and its cold-hearted intelligence turned into that of a beast. Nonetheless, it was still a dragon. Chapter 140. Rebellion King Embryo 4. Moreover, it didn't lose everything. It had a terribly wicked energy, and it regained something else because it rose again from death. Its defensibility was weakened, but its durability became stronger. It could continue to fight in the battle despite injuries that a living being couldn't endure, just like Skull. Hundreds of soldiers of the Free City evaporated in an instant. It didn't take too long for the remaining troops to be completely destroyed. There was no time. Embryo was looking this way even at the moment the Bone Dragon's breath weapon hit the ground. Kaiwan Yongho called. Kaiwan rolled her eyes at his somewhat tense voice. There was a bit of fear and a lot of pride to hide it in her ferocious eyes. Yongho said, "It's my wish, detain Embryo." Yongho spoke shortly, but what he meant was clear. After a brief pause, Kaiwan smiled bitterly. Although he stood in the midst of close to 1,000 enemies, facing the terrifying posture of Bone Dragon and Embryo, Yongho shouted proudly, "Okay, if you do well, I'll grant you one more wish, and grant my wish too." This wasn't the time for anybody to smile, but Kaiwan spoke cheerfully with an effort. Yongho also responded with a bitter smile. "Don't you think you are using your right to grant wishes too often? Because it's worth it." She stopped saying anything further, then stared at Embryo instead of Yongho. She wore a fierce smile befitting her ferocious gaze. "Defense is my specialty. I'll stick it out, but come back to me quickly. Honestly, I think this is going to be rather tough for me." The moment she finished talking, the battlefield frozen by Bone Dragon. Dragon began to move again. Bone Dragon spread its wings and hit the ground. Elagos and Ophelia resumed fighting. Shouts, screams, and cries filled the battlefield. Embryo moved forward, fully opening her four horns. Kaiwan stepped forward. She showed her back, not her face, to Yongho. Yongho also turned around. Instead of watching Kaiwan, he hugged her waist, and Catalina understood what she was supposed to do. Catalina hugged him face to face and spread her wings of black mana. Their attack was simultaneous. Bone Dragon finally screamed and soared into the sky. By wielding the whip sword, Kaiwan recklessly slaughtered the enemy soldiers located between her and Embryo. Tigrius raised his head, and Elagos and Ophelia shared their intention through their eyes. They broke through Embryo's forces to move toward Kaiwan. Catalina flew, and the traces of red flames were added to the black traces in the sky. Flying over while burning the remnants of the flames, Salami carried Yongho and Catalina on its back again. Yongho looked down at the ground for the last time. Skull and Death Knight were fighting against each other. Elagos and Ophelia almost reached Kaiwan. Kaiwan attacked Embryo and his soldiers recklessly, as if to attract their attention deliberately. Embryo didn't counterattack Kaiwan. He stepped forward and stopped. He looked at Yongho. Embryo's eyes were cold, and Yongho knew it. Although he didn't know why, Yongho realized that Embryo also took an adventure. Despite the fact that he was in a very favorable situation, Embryo exerted all his powers. Yongho was right. For Embryo, Bone Dragon was a secret weapon that he didn't want to use until the last moment. Embryo already revealed the Death Knight. If Bone Dragon was added to this, it would definitely attract others' attention too much. Perhaps some among the kings might feel suspicious about Embryo's tactics. The Death Knight and Bone Dragon were too powerful for a housemaster in the southern area to own. Nevertheless, Embryo revealed Bone Dragon. He knew from his sense, sharpened through numerous battles, that he did the right thing. He couldn't afford to hide it now, for he knew that this was a fight in which he had to kill Yongho by mounting a massive attack from the beginning. Embryo and Yongho turned away from each other, grabbing the handle on Salami's back. Yongho clenched his teeth. He released mana, as if not to be outpowered by Bone Dragon's massive body that blocked his vision. Embryo took another step and stared at Kaiwan, now attacking him magnificently, like a mantis in front of a wagon. He combined the mana released at random for a proper combat posture. Bone Dragon roared, facing its dreadful roaring right before its eyes. Salami screamed grotesquely. Salami spread the wings of the flames wide and soared higher into the sky. Yongho thought that he could not hope for Kaiwan's support when she was in an overwhelmingly unfavorable situation like now. So, he had to defeat Bone Dragon by joining hands with Catalina alone. Salami twisted its body with a wild scream. Despite its huge wings, Bone Dragon was fast. Bone Dragon's molars penetrated the space where Salami stayed until a moment ago. The sound of its teeth meshing each other was already horrible, but Yongho couldn't afford to be distracted by it. So, he ordered, and Salami flew again, screaming. Rather than increasing its distance with Bone Dragon, Salami got rather closer to it, then penetrated into its neck. At that moment, the blade of black mana created by Catalina with all her might hit Bone Dragon's neck. But that was it. Her attack left a small scratch on its bone, but it was not broken. Despite the attack, Bone Dragon kept its place. Rather, Catalina was almost thrown out by Bone Dragon's repulsive force. In the meantime, Yong-ho concentrated his consciousness and checked the mana flowing in the body of Bone Dragon. It was a huge flame. Crimson flames of mana covered the entire body of Bone Dragon. The flames were so strong that he couldn't spot any weaknesses. Bang! Bone Dragon once again bit the air. This time, it didn't stop there and released mana. Although it lost mana after becoming an undead, Bone Dragon didn't lose the operational skills on mana. Several lumps of mana condensed in a circle raced toward Yong-ho Salami Ka. Giving out a screech, Salami spread its wings. In a desperate aerobatic flight, it changed its direction in the air, then flew toward Bone Dragon's back once again. Yong-ho swung aimon and poured the green flames on the back of Bone Dragon. Bone Dragon roared. The unique energy of death of the undead was added to one of Bone Dragon's innate abilities, the Dragon Peer. It was a terrifying force that deprived the will of life, like the energy of death that Baphomet released. Although Catalina hastily combined the black mana to create a huge shield, it wasn't a physical attack on Bone Dragon Salami. Exposed to the energy of death, momentarily lost consciousness. Yong-ho endured it by clenching his teeth and ordered Catalina in heart. He swung Armon once again and burned anything around Bone Dragon to disturb its vision. Catalina lowered her posture while falling down. She buried himself on Yong-ho's back and put her arms on Salami's back. After releasing black mana and binding her around Salami's body, she spread huge wings behind its back. Cool. Screaming strangely, Catalina barely flapped her wings and flew again before crashing down on the ground. Bang! There was a big explosion again. Moreover, the ground exploded this time. The explosion occurred because Bone Dragon, with its vision blocked by the waves of the green flames, fired dragon breath recklessly toward the ground. The energy of death spread in all directions. Some of Embryo soldiers disappeared along with the ground. Salami finally regained consciousness and flapped its wings again. Catalina breathed out roughly and withdrew the wings of black mana. They couldn't fight this way any longer. Basically, it exhausted Yong-ho and his dungeon spirits. So, he needed something else to deal a fatal blow to Embryo. Salami shouted Yong-ho. At that moment, Salami repressed the desire to run away once more. At the command of its master, it concentrated all the power on the wings of the flames. Forgetting even Bone Dragon, Salami soared into the sky. Bone Dragon and Salami crossed each other. In that short moment, Yong-ho saw Bone Dragon once again. The mana of death flared up like flames, the mana of death. The energy of death, Yong-ho realized. He encouraged Salami even more. While rising almost vertically, he grabbed Armon. He concentrated mana on the magic field on his left hand. Bone Dragon was definitely strong. Its physical strength was superior to Baphomet's. However, it was different when it came to the energy of death. Unlike Baphomet, the incarnation of death that descended in the alien world, Bone Dragon was just an undead. Its physical force was incredible thanks to its powerful mana. It was essentially inferior to Baphomet. So, Yong-ho thought he could defeat Bone Dragon, and he had to. The red demonic sky Salami rotated in a place high enough to make everything on the ground seem so small. It turned its head to the ground and stared at Bone Dragon located hundreds of meters below Kaiaya. The wings of flames flared up in the air. Salami descended vertically. Yong-ho put Aemon on his side. Yong-ho and Catalina shined brightly at the same time, and a tremendous black mana covered the magic spear of the Red Lotus. It really created a huge spear lance charging was pouring vertically. Bone Dragon saw it. As soon as Salami turned in the air and opened its mouth, Bone Dragon opened its mouth and let out dragon breath. It was different from before. It wasn't a single shot. Like the breath of flames of red dragons, the energy of death continued to come out. But Salami didn't avoid it. It accelerated its speed by screaming wildly. The huge spear made of black mana and breath weapon clashed in the air. And at that moment, Yong-ho's magic field, as well as the godly energy of the King of Greed, sent out blue watery light, the force of life. The power of the immortal witch Skathak. covered the spear of black mana. The life-empowered huge spear penetrated the breath weapon, full of the energy of death from the front. It was a collision of tremendous power. The tip of the spear was shaken randomly. The breath weapon was shaken by the power of life, which could be called its complete opposite. But it was not strong enough. It couldn't penetrate the breath weapon. Rather than trampling on the energy of death, the energy of life gradually began to be eaten away. Skathash once told Yong-ho that he needed to pay the corresponding price to bring out his godly energy. Yong-ho could do it when he fought Baphomet. The power of his intense greed was so huge that even the magic spear of the Red Lotus admired it. But he didn't now. His mana was insufficient. He couldn't bring out the force of life from his godly energy. But he clenched his teeth and exerted all his power to bring out mana. If he were pushed out for a moment, he would perish here. Rather than penetrating the breath weapon, he would be crushed by the energy of death. He needed to be greedy now, so he could bring out the mana of greed. He had to pump up the will to live. Can he do it? I like you.